I would now like to introduce Dr. William Bernet, the founder and the chairman of the Parental Alienation Study Group. And he has also written a new book that's online for free on the website, Parental Alienation Theory. Please check that out. Dr. Bernet.
Thank you, Larry. So here we are, almost the end of the day. There's actually a couple more events, but this part of the day is the end of this part of the day. We've covered a lot of territory today and a lot of passion. And this is my niche. And all this big picture has my niche is parental alienation. And that seems like a special topic, but there's big overlap between these other topics, between shared parenting and gender equality and fathers' rights and false allegations and violence against men. There's a big overlap between all those things and parental alienation. I'm adjusting my picture here a little bit. I'm particularly interested today in misinformation or common myths about parental alienation. Why are we spending so much time on misinformation? And here's the reason. If we're going to be an advocate, or specifically, if you're interested in advocacy regarding this topic, regarding alienation, there's a huge amount of misinformation. And so you have to be aware, if you're going to advocate on behalf of PA, you have to be somewhat aware of our critics, and especially the severe critics and the outright misinformation that's been published and is online. So I'm going to talk about different types. I have a little catalog here of different types of misinformation, including ad hominem attacks, misquotations. I'm going to explain the straw man arguments that probably you're familiar with, and some other reasons why misinformation occurs. So first of all, I always have to give the definition because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. But when I talk about alienation, this is from one of my books or from one of my papers. A child, usually one whose parents are engaged in a high conflict separation or divorce. The child allies strongly with one parent and rejects a relationship with the other parent without a good reason. I think everybody agrees with that definition, but some people like diagrams. In a typical situation, the favorite parent blames the rejected parent. In terms of our definition, when we say parental alienation, we're talking about the mental state of the child and the child's rejection of parent B. And when we're talking about alienating behaviors, we're talking about the activities of parent A. So here's perhaps the most egregious form of misinformation, or outright false statements about people who have an interest, about the proponents of alienation. And the most obvious person there is Richard Gardner. These are some statements in a book published in Sweden, a book on family law published in Sweden. It says they refer to Gardner as an adherent of pedophilia. In a journal published here in the United States, the Journal of Child Custody, they refer to Gardner as a proponent of pedophilia. All that is a hoax. It's untrue. I don't know if I have to spell this out, but it's untrue that Richard Gardner was a proponent of pedophilia. He, in fact, whoops.
Click on the image with the mouse.
Click on the picture?
Yeah, it'll go.
Oh, he actually said that pedophiles should be in prison. And so people are misrepresenting him when they say that he's a proponent of pedophilia in some way. Here's another example of a personal attack which referred to me, not specifically by name, but the guy was talking about me. This was in a psychiatric newspaper that fathers' rights groups who don't like to be interfered with when they are sexually abusing their children are advocating for parental alienation to be in the DSM-5. That was a big deal back about 10 or 12 years ago. We were trying to get alienation in the DSM. Yes, sir.
That falls into another category outside.
Yeah, that sounds like an example of an alienating behavior. In other words, parent A is keeping the child from seeing parent B. So that's an alienating behavior. that may or may not result in the child becoming alienated. This misinformation in this psychiatric newspaper was many people wrote in, and the next issue they published 5 or 6 letters to the editor. And in fact, the guy who said that fathers' rights people are doing this so that they can continue to sexually abuse their children, he recanted that and he apologized. So that's an example where our complaining actually led to a reversal of the original statement. So here's another thing that I've been collecting many examples of misquotations of alienation literature in which they misquote us. And for instance, here's an example of a book that was actually published by the American Psychological Association. And this is another example where I complained and they corrected it. That the attorney, the head attorney for the APA, got involved and they corrected this statement, which says parental alienation syndrome assumes that a child's alignment with one parent is without good reason. And so see that word assumes, that's not what we said. They're actually quoting me and my colleagues in an article that we had written some years before. And we certainly don't assume that just because a child is rejecting a parent, that it's because of alienation. In fact, there are many reasons why that might happen. The second problem with this quote is it says, without justification, including situations in which there is child abuse. We don't say that. In fact, we specifically exclude situations of child abuse are not alienation. So those are 2 misstatements in 1 or 2 sentences. And like I said, we complained to the American Psychological Association, to the head of the APA, to their attorney, and so on, and they actually corrected those sentences. Here's another misquote. Here's an article written a couple of years ago in a journal that we like, the Family Court Review, and this is an article that is actually written by a friend of mine, which has this misstatement. Some alienation theorists, like me, appear to propound a single factor explanation of children's rejection of a parent because they do not give weight to causes other than alienation. So the author of this is saying that we only think about alienation when a child rejects a parent. We don't think about all the other reasons. But it's something I published. I list all the different reasons in this book chapter for why a child might reject another parent, including loyalty conflicts and being anxious, being stubborn, etc. And alienation is only one thing on that list. So what's a little disturbing is that the guy who wrote this, I know him, and he's sort of a friend of mine, but he misinterpreted parental alienation theory.
You're not going to share who?
Not right now. So another thing that happens is the straw man argument. The correct terminology these days, I gather, is to say the straw person argument. And in fact, I've used that once or twice. But what happens in this is an author will state something in which they misrepresent our position, and then they criticize it. They claim that we say something we don't say, and then they criticize what they claim we said. For instance, this is also in a very good journal, Child and Youth Services Review. If a child states she does not want to see her father, that's explained by the mother's manipulation. And it says the hypothesis that the child is being physically or sexually abused is not contemplated and therefore not investigated. So they're misrepresenting what we say, and they say we're pretty stupid to say that. The hypothesis is not contemplated, that there are some other reason. In fact, nobody says that. No, I've collected hundreds of articles about alienation and the critics of alienation, and the proponents of alienation have never said that in the last 35 years. But the critics of alienation say that we say that. So it's a persistent form of misinformation that we've tried to undo. In this one, we did write a letter to that journal. And as I recall, in that one, they let us write our own article and publish our own article in the same journal. I think this is that same book published by the American Psychological Association, which is a similar misquotation, that whenever a preferred parent speaks poorly, it's viewed as alienating rather than just parenting behavior. This is an extreme version of this. This is there's this organization, which is a good group called the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, and they have their own journal. And in this particular article by an attorney in Boston, the entire article, it wasn't just a paragraph, the entire article was based on that criticism of parental alienation theory. The entire article said this, that PAS encapsulates a theory that the occurrence of certain typical manifestations has the common cause of a favored parent's conscious or unconscious brainwashing. PAS is the disorder that excludes other factors that might impact the relationship and so on. The child, usually one whose parents are engaged in a high conflict separation or divorce, the child allies strongly with one parent and rejects a relationship with the other parent without a good reason. I think everybody agrees with that definition, but some people like diagrams. In a typical situation, the favorite parent blames the rejected parent. In terms of our definition, when we say parental alienation, we're talking about the mental state of the child and the child's rejection of parent B. Okay, here's another type of misinformation, which I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt here. I'm saying that this comes from lack of knowledge about parental alienation theory. It doesn't just come from their misreading something, or it doesn't come from their purposefully trying to badmouth us, but it's lack of knowledge. That's the case. And this is an example that has to do with the United States Congress, which is pertinent to our being here in Washington, D.C., and what we're going to be doing tomorrow. A few years ago, the House of Representatives had a resolution that they were considering. And there was a whole long resolution that was against violence against women, which was similar to the VAWA Act. But this is simply a resolution that said all sorts of things that we have to protect women and so on, which is all fine. But one sentence said this, a resolution before the United States House. Whereas scientifically unsound theories, such as parental alienation syndrome, enmeshment, and others, are frequently applied to reject parents' and children's reports of abuse. In other words, this is that whole thing where the mother will say that the dad is abusing the children. That's why the children don't want to go see him. And the dad will say, well, but she's alienating the children. And this resolution refers to unsound theories such as alienation. My colleagues in my organization, Parental Alienation Study Group, and didn't like this phrase. We went and visited the specific congressman who was the primary author or sponsor of this. Is not a bill. This is simply a resolution in Congress. We went to the guy, we visited him in his office and spoke to his staff, who were very understanding. We presented this as untrue, and the lady was very nice. She said, yeah, I understand. I see what you mean. A few weeks later, that phrase was removed from the resolution. It worked. A little piece of lobbying of two people, myself and my friend, visiting one congressman, but it was a key person, and it got fixed. When it went to the Senate, it had been, I think it goes from one to the other, it had been fixed, and the ultimate resolution was acceptable, at least in this particular sentence. So that's what I'm saying here. Those two phrases were removed. Here's another example that is coming up tomorrow, because one of the things that we're going to be talking to some legislators about tomorrow is the Violence Against Women's Act, or the last part of it is called Cadence Law. And it also, I think this is written by the same people who wrote that resolution 10 years ago. I think it's the same group who's trying to get their foot in the door in different federal legislation. There are several sentences in the Cadence Law that are a problem, but here's one. It says, a court may not, solely in order to improve a deficient relationship with the other parent of a child, remove the child from a parent who is competent, protective, and with whom the child is bonded. This sentence does not accept the reality that sometimes children are alienated, that sometimes parent A, who has bonding with the child and who's not obviously physically or sexually abusive, this law does not recognize the possibility that such a parent might engage in child psychological abuse and brainwashing the child against the second parent. The Cadence law doesn't accept that reality. And as a result, it says that a family court judge cannot order a reunification program because in severe cases, reunification involves separating the child from the abusive parent and involves separating the child, at least for a time, from the parent who has been engaging in the brainwashing behavior. That's what we do. That's what we recommend in severe cases. And this federal law, Cadence law, says you can't do that. At least because they have money, they'll give money to states. If a state enacts a law consistent with Cadence law, then the federal government will give money to that state. And that's how the government works in a lot of situations. But this is one of the things that I'm going to be addressing tomorrow when I visit several people in the House of Representatives. This is what I just said, that this part of the law ignores the possibility that a child might have a very unhealthy attachment, such as enmeshment and so on. Oh, here's another example. These are examples of what I am generously calling lack of knowledge. So I think this is that same book I mentioned earlier, but published by the American Psychological Association. It says the use of parental alienation syndrome or disorder is considered inadmissible in courts as it does not meet the established legal standard for the admissibility of expert testimony. Well, I don't know if you're aware, it is parental alienation inadmissible, not admissible in court. That's untrue. It's extremely admissible. And we've kept track, at least Dr. Lorandos, my colleague, has kept track of how many times parental alienation has been a United States court, trial court, or appellate court. And the total, if you add all this up, is about 1,300 times. This doesn't mean that the court concluded that alienation had occurred. This means that the court accepted testimony, that it was a legitimate topic to present. And so it's really totally untrue what they just said. It's considered inadmissible. Here's another thing which kind of represents lack of knowledge. PAS is unknown in medical settings, unquoted, I love this one, unquoted in medical books, and has been discredited by mental health professionals. Made my own collection of medical books, and these are books in which parental alienation is addressed, including several different encyclopedias. The fourth one there, it says Kaplan and Sadek's Comprehensive Textbook of Psychiatry. That's the world's psychiatry Bible, which is this enormous textbook. It's now in the 10th or 11th edition. So it's been used for 25 or 30 years. And other books, journals, the Family Court Review. This is in response to the misinformation that it's not represented in the medical literature. And then it also says it's not accepted by organizations. And these are professional organizations in this country that have acknowledged the reality in one way or another of parental alienation. Usually these are official documents. Sometimes organizations have a document about, for instance, how do you do a custody evaluation? Or how do you do parenting coordination? These are not just articles, but these are documents created by organizations that recognize the reality of alienation. So one reason why this happens, this is not random, by the way. When I studied all this, I collected several hundred examples of misinformation. A surprising number of them, they're not randomly distributed. A surprising number of them are in one journal, which is called, here, this is actually what the journal editor says, there's no known mechanism for explaining how indoctrination of children can occur. That seems like a ridiculous statement because children get indoctrinated in all sorts of ways. I mean, both in good ways and bad ways. I mean, children get indoctrinated to be ethical. but they also can be indoctrinated to be unethical. But this is the journal. It changed its name. It used to be the Journal of Child Custody, and now it's the Journal of Family Trauma. One of my articles that I tried to get published is I focused on the misinformation specifically from that journal. I haven't been able to get that published yet because the editors, the journal editors, feel that it's attacking a specific editor too much. But it is real. I mean, those are real examples of misinformation. This is what it says. This is what the journal of that publisher says. The accuracy of the content of this journal should not be relied upon and should be independently verified with primary source. That is really good advice, actually. I would agree with that. Why are we doing this? I already explained this at the beginning. I'll just say it again. If you're going to advocate for something, you have to have some knowledge of the critics of that topic. And that's why I try to spread the word here about the misinformation so that people can be aware if that's something they're interested in learning about. I came across this a couple of weeks ago. This is from the big American Psychological Association journal. It's called American Psychologist. This is their main, huge, what do you call it? Their flagship journal. And the whole article is why misinformation must not be ignored. Well, I agree with that. They go on to explain misinformation can be dangerous. People can act on misinformation and so on. I thought that was nice of them. That seemed to make sense for them to publish that article. What could we do about it? I've already given you some examples. We can complain to the publisher. We can publish a rebuttal. A couple of the examples I gave to you are these different journals where somebody published something that we considered misinformation, and the journal let us publish a new article in rebuttal. Occasionally, they occur in the same issue, back to back. There'll be an article about a topic and a rebuttal in the very same issue. That's cool to be able to do that. You can write a book. Several of our books talk about misinformation. The most recent one, Larry mentioned a couple of minutes ago, came out a couple of months ago. We call this the official synopsis of parental alienation theory. And it's not a big book. It's only about 150 pages. It's unusual because, first of all, it's not written by me. In other words, the author of the book is our organization. It's a book by Parental Alienation Study Group. That's the official author of the book. It's like the DSM. The author of the DSM is the American Psychiatric Association. You can do books like that. The second thing is it's only 150 pages, but I think it's a really good synopsis, and it's that length because we want attorneys to read it, and we want attorneys to submit it as evidence, as an exhibit. In other words, you can have an expert testify, and the attorney can say, what did you rely on? And the expert can say, well, I relied in part on this book published by PASG. And the attorney can say, I want to make this an exhibit in my case. That's part of the purpose. That's the explicit purpose of this book, is to educate attorneys and judges. It also addresses misinformation. It also has misspellings, I see. That's another feature of this book, which we feel that rather than just argue with these people, with the critics, we should try to talk to them and back and forth. We would like for the second or third or fourth edition of this book to gradually become a consensus of the believers in alienation and the critics, at least the soft critics, not the hard, ridiculous critics. But there are soft critics who agree that alienation happens, but they criticize maybe some fine points. We're engaging in what this thing is called adversarial collaboration, where you try to communicate with the people you don't agree with, and you do something together.